What is the worth of my philosophy? What is my philosophy? It is essentially panpsychism, which as a term is a bit triggering or loaded. It sounds anti-scientific, and I totally agree. It implies that consciousness is something irreducible to physics, something that therefore exists throughout the universe, that is somehow present at the most fundamental level of things. And well, I agree with the panpsychist claim that consciousness cannot be reduced to physics, and the reason for that is obvious. Physics is science. Physics is the business of modeling things in a mathematical way, building abstract models of entities out there based on how they are observed, how they affect our senses and measuring devices. So, of course, consciousness cannot be reduced to a science. Consciousness is a concrete, well, I would say process, concrete process, maybe not a thing. Thing is not a good word for consciousness, which is always something that happens. Consciousness is a concrete process where a science merely models objects. And physics is a model of reality. It's a picture, and we shouldn't conflate picture with the pictured. So, how is this related to panpsychism? My panpsychism is monistic. It's based basically on science, empirical science alone. I'm an identity theorist, which means that I take it that my experience here right now is identical with, maybe with some neural process. Maybe it cannot be reduced only to a neural process or identified with a neural process, because it also includes this environment I'm in. I'm constantly interacting with this environment. But be it as it may, it's still a physical process. It's part of this reality that we describe as physical. Well, there is vast amounts of neuroscientific evidence that consciousness is a brain process, because we can alter consciousness by altering brain processes. For example, if you take LSD, your consciousness changes. How can a simple chemical profoundly alter your consciousness if consciousness was something altogether different from what that compound is? This is the problem that dualism faced already at the time of Descartes. Princess Elizabeth noted this to him, which is basically the reason why dualism fails. Everything belongs to one single class, one single ontological kind of objects. There is only one single ontological kind. And physicalists like I call it physical. But what is physical? Physical is, if you read it in a Deraille sense, it refers to that something out there that produces our observations of physical entities, like that baby chair, or atom, which is of course not directly observed, but through measuring devices and indirectly. Physical is whatever that is that produces those kinds of observations. That something out there, whatever it is, which science describes or models as atoms, for example. So that is physical, and it is unknown. It is a complete mystery. We don't know what physical is. This is what Galen Strawson emphasizes, a great philosopher. So how is this related to panpsychism? Can we say anything of the things out there that causes our observations and moves the pointers of our measuring devices, like Eddington said, the physicist, back in the 19th century? No, 20th century, but anyway, Arthur S. Eddington. What moves our pointer readings, he said, asked. What is the atom beyond a schedule of pointer readings that the physicists model? Well, he said that it's this here right now, what I'm undergoing, although that's the wrong way of putting it, because there is really no I separate from the undergoing subject, distinct from the experience. There is just this, with a capital T, this, the happening of what could be called consciousness or experience. And it's also present in that small little thing out there. Consciousness is what moves the pointer readings, or what causes the pointer readings. Well, this might sound radical, but imagine as follows. Imagine that you go into an fMRI tube, functional magnetic resonance imaging, a device commonly used in neuroscience that detects where in your brain the blood flows, which parts of the brain are active. So you go into that device, and you can imagine different kinds of things, like playing tennis or walking in your house, or like thinking of the floor plan of your house. And then you see that when you imagine playing tennis, you see in the monitor of the device that your motor cortex activates. And when you imagine the spatial thing going in your floor plan, then you see that your visual spatial system is activated. It's not so simple, of course, but to simplify a bit. So, okay, nothing special. You say that, okay, that brain process somehow correlates with your imagining. But that's a really dangerous place that we are mentally here right now. You have your experience of imagining playing tennis, your hand moves, you try to hit the ball. And then you have this neural image. Like voxels in an image on a computer screen. How are the two related? Well, this is a long story that I will spell out in detail, but in short, the situation is that your experience is causing those images on the screen of the measuring device. Your experience of imagining playing tennis, and this example is of course from Adrian Owen's research group who detected consciousness in vegetative state patients, or which were thought to be in a vegetative state, using fMRI, and they detected it in this way. But your imagining playing tennis is what causes the fMRI readings. The concrete entity, the unknown hidden cause out there that produces the observation, is your experience. So in a sense, it's not the brain that causes the observation, it's your experience. And the experience as an experience, when it's not theoretically characterized in any way, it's phenomenologically it's not a brain process, because you could have the same experience without knowing that you have a brain. Yeah, but that's a long and complicated story, but essentially it's really simple, actually. This provides like evidence for the hypothesis that it's your experience that causes the images, in the case of these neural images. But how is this related to panpsychism? How could this be evidence that our observations of water molecules or atoms would be caused by something similar to our consciousness? Well, again, we can rely on empirical science here. So, what is consciousness? Consciousness is this here right now. What I'm experiencing, sort of. And according to science, it's a neural process. And like I said, the experience is identical with a neural process, and that means that the thing in itself out there that underlies or causes the observations of neural activation is the experience. So the term neural activation refers to the experience, and in that sense they are identical. The term neural activation refers to the experience. So it doesn't really refer to a brain process, sort of, because brain process, it's a theoretical characterization of something which is not just words, it's this experience. Okay, experience is identical to this neural activation. For example, recurrent processing or global activation of this global neuronal workspace, or whatever, how you characterize it, depends on your theory. We don't know yet, but we will know eventually how to scientifically characterize consciousness. So, what about atoms? Well, the neural processes are made of individual neurons that are made of organic molecules that are made of atoms. So literally, atoms constitute experience. Atoms, or more precisely, the thing in itself out there that we refer to as atom, or that we model as atom, is that something out of which experiences are made of. Isn't that something? Experiences are made of atoms. So what are these atoms that make up experiences? They must be something quite different from what we have thought they are, because they can make up these experiences. Although when I say this, it's a sort of a straw man, because it presupposes dualism. If it really is the case that experiences are neural processes, like identity theory says, and like we have vast empirical evidence that this is the case, then of course, due to identity, experiences are neural activation. So because neural activation is made of atoms, so of course experiences are made of atoms by identity substitution, logically. So what can we say anything? Now the question is the big question. You might agree thus far about the reasoning, although already at this point we have come far away from traditional materialism. I don't even know what that is, because this that I have now described is already a position where we don't really know what matter is. And many materialists think they know what matter is, but they don't. They only model how matter affects their measuring devices and senses, but they don't know what matter is beyond those observations and theoretical models. And you could say, like following Wittgenstein, we can't speak of that, so we should just be silent. And I'm really sympathetic towards this, basically. But then we would logically also have to stop speaking of our experiences, because our experiences are neither are they words. But let's not go into that. It's related to Zen philosophy, that we all experiences is really ineffable, like psychedelic experiences is. So that we cannot really describe our experiences any more than we can describe matter in itself. So we can't really describe anything. So it's just a language game. But let's not go into that radical direction, at least not yet. So the materialists, they don't know what matter is. Can we say anything of matter in itself? Science says a lot of things about matter. Electrons have negative charge. Water is made of hydrogen and oxygen and so on, like vast amounts of things. These are theoretical models of things out there. And this might be all that we can say of matter. And these theoretical models and descriptions, they are most likely in some sense true or veridical because they work. Because we can fly to the moon. Now Frank Sinatra is starting to play in my head, but never mind. Airplanes fly. And so on. This no miracles argument for materialism. If all these devices work so well, it would be a miracle that they work based on our theories, if the theories weren't in some sense true. But these are still just models, even if they were true, and we have good reasons to suppose that they are true. They are still just models. Can we say anything of that something that is beyond the models, that is moving the pointers, like Eddington says? Well, in our own case, we can. We can go into the fMRI tube and move the pointers ourselves. We can voluntarily move the pointers. We can be the hidden cause, which is no longer hidden, at least for ourselves. Isn't that marvelous? Like fantastic thing. You can yourself be the hidden cause of your observations. I call this the neural mirror, and you can take it further and it becomes fascinating. But not today. I have to take the car to repair. So atoms in themselves, beyond the models, can we say anything of them? Yes, we can. Because experiences are made of atoms. We can say that atoms are the constituents of experiences. And atoms must be, one could use the term intrinsically in themselves, but I don't use the term intrinsically in the sense that Russellian monists use, because they are property dualists and I'm not. So I'm not using the word intrinsic in that sense. I'm using it in a purely epistemic sense. I mean the object or the thing in itself that is beyond the atomic model or the theory, beyond the theory in physics. So the atom intrinsically must be as similar to our experiences as neural correlates of consciousness are to atoms. So I repeat, this might be a difficult thing. So there is kind of a parallelism between scientific models, what we know, and the hidden causes of the scientific models or the observations. So models are in our mind, the things are out there, unless it's our own consciousness that we are talking about. Forget about that now. So if science says on this level of models that experiences are made of atoms and they are this close to each other, not so very close, it's like highly more complex. The neural processes are more complex than individual atoms or individual water molecules or individual neurons. But still, it's a continuum. So whatever atoms are intrinsically in themselves, it must be continuous with this that I'm experiencing right now, my experience. So this is a kind of panpsychism. And it's really the trivial claim that everything belongs to the same ontological category as our experiences. And it follows already from monism, which just says that everything that exists belongs to one single ontological category. But now the question is, if we are monists, physicalists, like traditional physicalists, or who Strawson call physicsalists, who take the physical picture of reality for reality itself. So traditional physicalists, they define this ontological category, this one category, based on science, physics. But that's just a model of reality, a picture, like a shadow on the wall of Plato's cave. But we ourselves are the sun out there, outside the cave, that shines into the consciousnesses of other people and animals. Okay, too poetic. Panpsychism is already too anti-scientific. Philip Goff, for example, he's a bit anti-neuroscience. He says that neuroscience doesn't say anything about consciousness because it only models the extrinsic properties and consciousness is an intrinsic property. But that's property dualism, saying that science cannot model consciousness. Of course science can model consciousness. Consciousness is like anything else in the world. Just like anything else that science models. Science models consciousness, but the model is not reality in itself that underlies the model. So as an identity theorist, I of course think that science models consciousness because the thing in itself that science models as neural activation, it's consciousness. But anyways, so that's panpsychism. And it's completely scientific, based on empirical premises. At least mainly. I have not been able to point out directly what is the non-empirical premise here. Of course, it's philosophical reasoning. Oh, I had a loose thread there, and that was, how do we define this one single ontological category? Is it based on the model, like traditional physicalists say, everything is this atoms and molecules and so on? And that's true, it is. But then there is the other kind of monism or idealism, that everything is really mental. Well, this is also true. This, what I'm experiencing right here, right now, could be called mental. It's just a word, really. It makes really no difference, but it's still a suitable word for this right here, right now. So how can these both be true at the same time, idealism and physicalism? They are usually considered as opposites. The thing in itself that underlies the scientific observations always is mental, or at least belongs to the same ontological category as this that is mental. But there are now some philosophical premises that should be clarified. It's not a straightforward reasoning. But on the level of models, pictures of reality, everything is physical in the traditional physicalist sense, because even my experience right now it's nothing but a neural process. So it can be modeled as nothing but a neural process. So both are true. In itself, all matter is continuous with consciousness. And in that sense, you could say that it's all mental or ideal. Maybe that's a too radical term. So panpsychism is maybe a better term. But the point is really simple. Everything belongs to the same ontological category as this experience right here, right now. So that's the scientific kind of panpsychism that is non-metaphysical in a sense, because it doesn't rely on this traditional metaphysical reasoning about intrinsic properties and extrinsic properties and relational and categorical dispositions and so on, all this kind of metaphysical, I would like to say, nonsense. It's not really nonsense. They are sincerely trying to understand these things, but I'm really skeptical towards metaphysics generally. I don't like metaphysics. I think it's just language games which I don't like those kinds of language games I don't like. Maybe this is already a language game, but metaphysics, somehow I think it's just like revolving around the real thing without ever getting at it. It's like Western man's fictions. Well, forget about that. I have my reasons for being so anti-metaphysical, but this is my version of panpsychism, and I want to call it panpsychism to amplify the point, to emphasize that science doesn't really tell what reality is in itself, and in itself reality is continuous with you, with whatever you are, your consciousness, my consciousness. We are not exceptional in the universe. We are made of atoms, just like everything else. We are not exceptional. If we, our pleasures and pains, if we have intrinsic value, if pain has intrinsic value, if pleasure has intrinsic value, if happiness has intrinsic value as a conscious process, happiness as a conscious process, then everything has intrinsic value because everything belongs to the same ontological kind as consciousness. And, well, I started this short talk, which is directed at myself, for a grant application, because I have to tell why my research should be financed. Why is my philosophy important? Well, everybody should ask this question. Why is their work important? If it's not important, stop doing it. So this is why I think my work is important, to show in the spirit of deep ecology. This is one way of putting it. There are many other ways. To show in a spirit of deep ecology that everything is one and everything has intrinsic value, that we should protect nature, essentially, and value other living beings, including humans. Humans have intrinsic value, and so have forests. And this also has implications for mental health, to see that we are not really alienated from the rest of the nature. We are not just thrown here, spirits, like in this body sack of flesh and meat. It's not the case. It's not like that. In itself, beyond this surface, beyond these observations, everything is essentially of the same kind as consciousness. I would say poetically full of light, full of intrinsic meaning. But because panpsychism is so, people think it's pseudo, anti-scientific, like woo-woo, whatever. So these might be reserved for poets and so on. But anyways, I think it's true. We should not be ashamed of saying these trivial but deep and profound things aloud, because usually all the true profound things are a bit trivial, but really it's half an hour I should go get the car repaired.